It's day 320. It's also March 21st, 2020. And we are in Marion, Arkansas. You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life. Life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description. We continued that trek west on Alabama 78, crossing over into Mississippi by mid-morning. And while rolling through the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, I noticed another shift early on in Mississippi. The roadside greenery was suddenly injected with a blast of color. Those cherry blossoms were back. And we'd learned that Macon and Georgia, well, they're not the only ones that know how to put on a show in these parts. And that pop of color, in contrast to the greenery, stunning. Next stop, Tupelo, Mississippi. And a bit of a fun twist. We had stopped for gas, and as we pulled out of the gas station, headed back out to the highway, well, a big old sign, complete with arrow, directing us to the birthplace of Elvis Presley. Of course we followed the arrow. I mean, come on, who wouldn't? Now, I guess I kind of did grow up listening to Elvis Presley a little, via the extensive record, yeah, that's record as in vinyl, collection of my mom's. But I guess I never really truly graduated to fan status because I had no clue that he was born in Tupelo, Mississippi until right now. Graceland. That's all I ever really remembered. But nonetheless, here I am, East Tupelo, Mississippi, taking photos of the house Elvis was born in. And all the while, flashbacks in my mind. 1978, North Branch, Minnesota. Babysitter dropped off, mom gone to work, and within minutes, that 17-year-old babysitter, apparently a big Elvis fan, my brother and I, a record player out, hairbrushes in hand, belting out Elvis songs as if it were 1957. And of course, my favorite, when I hopped up on the bed, star of the show for Jailhouse Rock. A 14-year-old kid with not the least of a notion that 42 years later, he'd stand in the courtyard built around what is now a museum, looking at and into a history of pop culture in America. And learning that in 1934, an 18-year-old guy named Vernon Presley, newly married, borrowed $180 from his boss, and with the help of his dad and brother, they built this house. Simple as simple could be. Kitchen, bathroom, living room, bedroom, single light bulb in every room, all they needed. And just in time. Because in 1935, they'd welcome a son into Tupelo and name him Elvis, Daddy Vernon's middle name. And the rest, as they say, is history. By the 50s, Elvis had a new name, the King of Rock and Roll. And shortly after that, one of the most recognizable names on the planet. Ah, good times. And 100 miles up the road, leaving Mississippi and entering Tennessee. The first sign up, Graceland. But kind of a bummer, with everything shutting down, pandemic. We'd have to kind of skip that exit. Next time for sure. Instead, we'd skirt Memphis, trying to avoid traffic. And our time in Tennessee would be short-lived. Just a couple miles beyond the Tennessee Welcome Center, we'd cross the Mississippi River into Arkansas. And more shifts in scenery. The pine tree-lined highway through rolling hills almost instantly flattened out on the Arkansas side, replaced with the distant horizon, lined no longer with the greenery of pine trees and budding poplars, but instead endless rows of oak and maple, still dormant, filling the skyline with a much more wintry feel. Arkansas hasn't quite gotten around to spring yet. And it doesn't help that the temperatures are dropping rapidly as we move northwest and into yet another series of spring thunder showers. I'm missing St. Mary's more with every mile. And having clocked nearly 200 of them for the day, we found a spot to park for the night in Marion, Arkansas, and snapped a few photos of that Arkansas horizon. And with each update on this pandemic thing, not so good. I'd learned that something like 16 or 17 states had issued these stay-at-home orders. And over 40 states have begun shutting down certain types of businesses, concerts, sporting events, any activity that could bring large crowds together. The NBA, NFL, well, pretty much every major sport organization, from what I can tell, has postponed all public activity indefinitely. The NFL the other day said that their scheduled draft activity would be held virtually. Wow. I had asked the cashier at the gas station in Tupelo what he had heard about any of this, and he just sort of shrugged. He said the governor had issued a state of emergency, but that he wasn't even really sure what that meant yet. Wash your hands a lot, I guess, he said. He went on, so far, seems like business as usual around here. And he was right. It did seem like that. In Mississippi, anyways. We'd found our spot for the night. Not a very cool one, more utilitarian. But it'll get the job done. Some sort of big paved parking area. Tons of trucks. Wasn't a rest stop, not a truck stop, but clearly a popular spot. Truckers around here sure use it for some shut-eye. And for us, we'll just use it to ride out the rain some, do some reading, and grab some shut-eye. We had just passed through so much. Macon, Birmingham, Tupelo, Memphis. And, yep, my brain was doing it again. Music. It's hard to trek across Georgia, Arkansas, walk through the birthplace of Elvis, and drive by Memphis, and not have the area's music in my head. And before I knew it, then I'm walking in Memphis, walking with my feet 10 feet off the peel. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? I'm a little past Little Rock, further down the line. Too soon to know what's up ahead, too late to change my mind. That's the night that the lights went out in Georgia. That's the night that they hung an innocent man. Maybe it was Memphis. Maybe it was southern summer nights. Maybe it was you. Maybe it was me, but it sure felt right. Oh my gosh. Crazy how fast my head filled up. Pulling in here tonight, I wondered, how many are there, really, songs written about or inspired by this American South? And now I know. A lot. Type a few keywords into the internet and poof, hundreds. Memphis, Tennessee. Midnight train to Memphis. Stuck inside of Mobile with Memphis blues again. Memphis beat. Graceland. Big River. That's how I got to Memphis. Georgia on my mind. Midnight train to Georgia. The devil went down to Georgia. Ramblin' man. Walking back to Georgia. I think hundreds of them. But enough of that, I thought. Dougie and I got an evening walk coming up. And while Dougie may be used to Dad randomly bursting into song, we got a bunch of trucker neighbors here, and we do not need witnesses to my silliness. And besides, Marion, Arkansas? Just like back in Gwyn, I only knew exactly where I was after my phone told me. And you'd think a town of some 14,000, on the banks of the Mississippi River, smack dab in the middle of West Memphis, Arkansas, and Memphis, Tennessee, well, it might struggle to have an identity, a history of its own. But not Marion. This place was incorporated 124 years ago, in 1896. But its history goes back much further. The area's first inhabitants, well, it adds more names to the list of Native Americans we've learned of. Here, the Osage, Omaha, Ponca, Kansa, and Quapaw. The Spanish would arrive in the area in the 1500s, and the region would be part of the Spanish Louisiana Territory, or New Spain Territory, all the way up until 1803. The Spanish had actually begun issuing land grants. Then, that secret deal between Spain and France, just in time for the area to join the U.S. as part of the Louisiana Purchase. And Marion, named for Marion Tolbert, an early resident that donated the land that would become home to the Crittendon County Courthouse. The original courthouse was a framed-in structure built in 1836 to serve as the county courthouse as Marion was becoming the county seat. That structure would be burned to the ground in January of 1865 by Confederate soldiers, which was kind of weird to me since Marion was part of the Confederacy. But apparently Union troops had begun seizing courthouses throughout the South. They determined that the documents contained in these courthouses were valuable in their war efforts. So the Crittendon County Courthouse would fall victim to its very own Confederate forces in an effort to prevent Union capture. I thought, burn the whole building down? Couldn't they have just hidden the documents somewhere else? Interesting, but I guess there were other concerns, that the enemy could also occupy the building and utilize it in other ways. So maybe war, crazy times. But in the end, Marion and Crittendon County, they'd come back, and this time they'd drop $100,000 in 1873, when a 2-story brick courthouse would open its doors and resume the tasks of running a county. But guess what? In 1909, an electrical fault in the building's 36-year-old wiring would take the building out again. Total loss. Man, I thought, that poor courthouse just can't catch a break. But the folks in Marion, not the sort to give up, I guess. By 1911, the current courthouse would be up and running again, this time in the classical revival style of architecture. And through all this, regardless from which structure, Marion would maintain its role as the county seat and hub of county government from way back there in 1836 to today. 184 years. And in 1977, the courthouse would be placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And next, in Marion, Arkansas, I'd read Trail of Tears again. I'd remembered reading of the Trail of Tears even back in New Mexico and Texas. Another dark period in American history, when acts that would be considered genocidal by any of today's standards would be inflicted on the quote-unquote the 5 civilized tribes, a term applied by the U.S. government to the Cherokee, Muskogee, or Creek as they were called back in Georgia, the Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations. And over a span of some 20 years, beginning in 1830, a forced relocation program would be put into place and enforced by U.S. troops. Native Americans would be forced from their homelands to travel on foot to a region the U.S. would call the New Indian Territory. We call it Oklahoma. Some of these Native Americans would walk thousands of miles. That trail would see some 60 to 100,000 Native Americans pass through over those 20 years. And along the way, countless would die from exposure, disease, even starvation. I'd also learned that, beginning with George Washington, Native Americans had been defined by the U.S. government as biologically equal, but as a society inferior. And this belief, continuing through the Jefferson administration and clearly beyond, is the rationale that the U.S. government would use to justify their treatment of Native Americans. The government would actually refer to the process of forced relocation as, quote-unquote, civilization. The Cherokee, on the other hand, would coin the phrase Trail of Tears. In one stretch of the Trail of Tears, referred to as the Bell Route, passed through Marion on its way to that new Indian Territory. Parts of the trail have been restored and preserved, marked with historical markers, one of which right here in Marion. A lot to absorb, so much stuff. It certainly makes one feel grateful for how far we've come, what's been done, but at the same time, kind of realizing the importance of knowing, not forgetting, and getting more stuff done. I'd also randomly read that Arkansas has changed its official nickname from the Land of Opportunity to the Natural State. It seems here in Arkansas, they want to highlight the state's natural beauty and abundant outdoor recreational activities. The state's got a little of most everything: mountains, forests, rivers, lakes. The state also wants to underscore the fact that they're committed to preserving these natural resources for generations to come. They use the term ecotourism around here a lot. I'll look that up later. I'm getting tired. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the natural state has in store for us tomorrow. And I wonder what we'll learn there.
Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously, you can.